Welcome everyone to our session. We are here. I'll wait for Kaylin to respond in the chat. Oh, there she goes. Kaylin, can you see my question about staying on time? Do you still want us to end on time, or do we have a little flexibility? She'll put it in the chat. In the meantime, while I wait for Kaylin to do that, let's get started. Hello, everyone. I am Che Abram. Welcome to our Equity at the Center conversation featuring our panelists, AnnMarie Baines, Dr. L.B. Williams, and Sloan Nefertari. They will introduce themselves and let everyone know. 1025. Okay. And we will everyone know about who they are and the organizations that they represent and are a part of. I just want to do a little housekeeping. Please feel free to use the Q&A feature for any questions and things that you all have. If you would like to use that feature, if there's anything that comes up, try to signal us either in the chat or the Q&A feature. And again, we're going to work to end our session by 10:25, just so we can stay on time. And I'll just go over the objectives really quickly. The objectives of this session are to share out best practices for modeling equity in the girls service sector, introduce members to the facilitators and organizations collaborating with Alliance for Girls for the fall workshop series around equity, youth power, and radical safety, and facilitate discussion on how we want to define equity as an alliance and community serving girls and gender expansive youth. And so I'll ask our panelists to introduce themselves briefly, and we'll start with Sloan Nefertari.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Nefertari Sloan, but I do go by my surname. No worries. I know it's confusing, so you're good. My pronouns are they, them, desired. She and her are acceptable. I am a non-binary sex educator who has been facilitating conversations about sexuality since 2016. And I started with MISSSEY in February as the training and prevention coordinator to deliver anti-human trafficking workshops for these students, staff and faculty, to do some prevention and, just spread a lot of awareness here. So excited to be here. And that's all I have for now.
Thank you so much. And next we'll go to Dr. L.B. Williams.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. L.B. Williams. My pronouns are she, her, they. I'm the founder of Black Girls Brilliance. We started in Oakland, here at Montero Middle School, and it was founded off of my dissertation research, especially during the time where President Obama had blessed boys and men of color with $100 million, and girls and women were left with absolutely nothing. And my girls were like, hey, what about us? Why aren't we getting programs? Why can't we do these things? We've since expanded to Johannesburg, South Africa, where we have 2 schools we're working in. We'll be expanding to Ghana. And the essence of what we do is that all Black girls are brilliant. And when we say girl, we mean gender expansive youth. We are representing all. And the other piece is that being a Black girl is not monolithic. We want to celebrate the brilliance of the diversity and the uniqueness within Black girlhood as well. And that's all I have for now.
And we will have AnnMarie Baines. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm AnnMarie Baines, founder and executive director of the Practice Space, and really pleased because we just joined the Alliance for Girls. So this is my first meeting. So nice to meet all of you. So the essence of the Practice Space is all about building confidence around communication skill development. So for us, self-expression comes through voice. And it's one thing to say we want to hear youth voices, but it's another to really call for education around communication skill development to help people tell their stories feel safe, feel like their story even matters or is worthwhile. So in our work, we do public speaking coaching, and we focus on listening, we do presentations, but we also do debate and self-advocacy and storytelling and poetry. So the full range of self-expression. And so we were founded 4.5 years ago in my hometown. I was one of those girls who, without speech and debate, I wouldn't be here on this panel. I wouldn't be able to feel confident enough to speak on the spot like this. So, I always keep that at the heart of our work, just imagining how many opportunities, especially to lead, aren't possible when girls don't feel like they can speak up. And so my pronouns are she, her, and I'm really excited to share our stories here today.
Thank you. And so our first question will essentially be, and feel free to have this flow like a conversation amongst you all. So what does equity mean to your organization, and how is it implemented?
I can start. For us, we always, in our organization, we serve about 1,200 participants, and 80% are women and girls. And for us, equity is an environment. And so specifically, it's an environment. In order to speak up, you have to actively reduce the predictability that the same people will always succeed and the same people will always fail. And by doing that, you have to disrupt the power dynamics that are historically have been there for a very long time. And I'm a special education teacher by training. And one of the first things my mentor mentioned to us that I really bring into all of our programs is that in order to disrupt and create equity, you need to maximize opportunities for people to showcase their strengths. But at the same time, you have to minimize the impact of oppression that happens throughout history. And so if, as an educator, you're working to create that space, that equity as an environment, you have to create some fun, some joy, but you also have to do that serious work alongside youth to identify what those barriers have been throughout history.
I'll piggyback on what AnnMarie shared, especially with equity being in the environment. I think we often misunderstand equity as being just simplified as access. And what does that mean for students? Because access and knowing is quite different. So I think within Black Girls Brilliance, it's about the knowing. It's about the action within the access. And so, I equate it to some of these institutions, PWIs that say, oh, if their students' parents are making, under 50,000, we can fully fund you, et cetera, et cetera. But yet, what's the knowing in that part? They may have that within their, their campaign, or they're doing these great things for communities that don't have access. But what's the knowing about that, and what's the relationship that's happening there? And so, like with BGB, one thing we really do is get to know, so that our girls can have, again, that access of knowing as well. And so that's my input.
Thank you, LB. I think that the work that MISSSEY does when it comes to human trafficking is a knowledge of the susceptibility of Black girls to be at higher risk for these kinds of experiences. So I think that for us, equity looks like intention, and it looks like being able to target the services that we have to populations that need them the most.
That's beautiful and succinct. I was expecting you to go a little bit longer, and I'm like, oh no, that was powerful. And so our next follow-up to that is engaging girls in gender-expansive youth in program design and decision-making processes, essentially that language around shared governance. So how do you share power between the adults and youth in your organization?
I can start since I was a little briefer in the last question. So we've got a lot of leadership and advocacy initiatives that we try and incorporate in our programming. There's a STAND program, there's a Thrive internship that is for survivors to be involved and develop some professional skills, networking, be able to contribute to the programming that we are developing. I also think that we do a good job of getting buy-in and feedback from our clients, and making sure that we have continuous focus groups and opportunities for them to provide criticisms, anything that they're not comfortable with, that they're not happy with, because if it's not working, then we're going to be losing our population, and retention is a priority.
I can go next. I think one of the things that we pride ourselves on is building relationships with our girls. Middle school is that interesting time, right? You can see a girl that was really outgoing, gregarious, elementary school, and here comes middle school. I call it the shutdown moment. And it's very critical because a lot of our girls can shut down and kind of move themselves out of the space, or depending on the support that's there, they just blossom and continue. I think pushing against what happens within that teen tween space. Like Sloan, we use focus groups, building one-on-one relationships, especially in the middle school time, because we want to know, who are you? What is it that you need specifically? And then we look to see, where do we find those connections? Because that helps break down that kind of like, if girls are like, yeah, I don't know about that one, or I don't know if we'll get along, or how do we fit into this space? It really brings parts of their personality and their individuality into a group collectivity as we do our planning. And also we use like a lot of YPAR activities, and the one similar to what Afi's going to be doing is going to really focus on circle building right now, because our students are struggling coming back in this pandemic and holding all of the emotions and struggling with, how do we engage with each other? How do we have this relationship now? And so that's at the core of that work.
I love, Dr. Williams, how you spoke about just the discomfort and the feeling and emotion that comes in this work. It's not just about kind of, oh, we'll just talk right now. I think also you pointed out this transition period that keeps happening. So at the practice space, we serve girls as young as 8 years old, and then our oldest is 75. And so, they're girls too. And I think throughout that work, what we see is not just that if you start speaking and learning communication early, you carry it with you all the way. It keeps happening. Every time you transition, there's a new feeling of uncertainty and new feeling of discomfort, which keeps coming up again. And like, am I worth it? What do I have to say? Is my opinion important? So in our work with program design specifically, we do a few different formats, and the whole point is to be able to help youth speak up as much as possible and listen to each other and connect to each other. So from that, the pathway to leadership emerges, because you're learning how to speak, you're experiencing it, you're having fun. Oh, let me try debate today. Let me try poetry today. But then ultimately, we then build in opportunities for youth to coach each other, both within programs, but also across programs. So we just had 17 youth who were high school level coach our middle school camp. So that was really fun. And then we also just instituted our first junior board of directors. So that's high school and college students. And they're going to be helping us write our upcoming book on how youth can dismantle oppression. And so they're writing stories and poems. They're doing editing for us. And so I feel like I'm accountable to them all the time. And then we're also launching some speech and debate tournaments for youth of all levels. And the youth in our group definitely said, we want to have more intergenerational experiences. So we want to be on a debate team with an adult, or we can be a youth who's judging an adult and thinking about, what does judgment mean and how can youth help define that? So it's a lot of fun when they have a chance to feel that safety.
Thank you all for those responses. Hearing a lot. Thank you for holding the space around intentionality, space around accepting criticism in terms of helping your programs and organizations grow to the next level and continue to be responsive to youth, and also just holding space for that place of like the amount of discomfort that can happen in transition that is occurring in our youth populations, especially our girls and gender expansive youth. So our next piece is really thinking about Alliance for Girls Radical Safety Report. What are best practices that you have? And I would argue, well, we have some time actually. So what are some best practices you have for creating radical safety for the youth in your program and the girls, specifically the girls and gender expansive youth in your programs?
I'll go. I've been thinking a lot about just those two words together, right? Radical safety. And I think about the work we do with girls, all orgs do with girls. And I also think about how do we make sure that we are also not replicating respectability politics within that? That we're not kind of layering patriarchy on programs that we're trying to use to support girls, but having girls actually be kind of like at the center of the issue instead of kind of making them the issue again in situations, instead of having them be empowered with making decisions about what they how they can move throughout the world. More specifically, I think when it relates to schools, I had to challenge a colleague on the dress code that one of our students came to school in, right? And one of the comments was around, you can't wear that around boys. And I paused it right there because all of a sudden it became a problem on what our young person was wearing for her to control the male gaze, So when we're thinking about radical safety, at least for me as well, I think about how to rethink the way we teach girls to move in the world, and not moving in the world to bend towards whether or not we get a reaction, especially in these spaces where girls can be more vulnerable, to kind of diminish themselves and mute themselves. And then also to push back on our boys, and we need to teach our boys differently, and or others who are acting in spaces where their actions are violent towards girls and gender expansive youth. So I've been kind of wrestling with all of that because the way schools have been set up traditionally, they've been set up to really punish girls, especially girls of color and gender expansive youth of color.
Yes, we think a lot about this term radical safety, and it was interesting. One of our youth, she's a poet laureate in Richmond, California. She just has this wonderful definition that I want to borrow from her temporarily. But she says she makes this distinction between a safe space and a brave space. A safe space is a space where you can come and connect with everybody and share the same experience. A brave space is where you are out of your comfort zone and where you are doing things that you normally wouldn't do. They're both good, and sometimes you need to come out of your comfort zone to know and learn more about yourself. And I just think it's really important, especially for girls and for any youth who are struggling with their identity, to be able to have that safety where they know they can have this collective experience and that who they are will be accepted. They can come however they are. And even if it's not done or they can't figure it out and they have uncertainty, and they should say, I think in public speaking, we often say, don't say but is uncertainty, and uncertainty is important when it comes to identity. And so for us, the practices that we really focus on is first creating that space where you want to build an identity as a speaker, as a storyteller, as someone who has something important to say. But you also then need to facilitate it. So we teach youth how to facilitate each other. And so a few different tips around that we use best practices wise are open-ended language. So language that's not a clear right or wrong, or those teacher voices where sometimes you can tell there's a right answer and there's a tone that everyone's trying to guess. So that open-ended language, and then being able from there to ask really specific prompts of one another. So asking just better questions so that we can show interest and curiosity in one another. And then as a facilitator, a lot of times when you put yourself out there and you say something, it's really nerve-wracking, and you have to validate immediately. Even if you don't agree, thanking people for sharing what they just shared is really important. And for youth to do that with each other is even more meaningful than an adult doing it. And then finally, being able to synthesize and transition and helping each other kind of bring all the learnings together, I think is really important. So, as budding facilitators themselves and speakers, they not only are able to speak up, but they can facilitate space for others to speak up. And that's the part I'm so proud of, is just when youth are able to create space for each other to speak, and they do that on their own terms. This is better than any of us can do.
Oh, that was awesome. Both of you spoke so eloquently. A lot of what you said was like sparking other things to say. So I'm hoping that this comes out cohesively. What Dr. Williams spoke on about the male gaze and patriarchy definitely reminded me of the importance of sex education and just how these conversations need to be grounded in a foundation of consent and, ensuring that people feel comfortable in whatever space that they're in. I think at our organization, something that we've been putting a lot more intention on is accountability as the caregivers, as folks who want to be supportive as adults in our lives who feel responsible for the safety of young people. We have done internal trainings on healing cycles of harm in order to figure out how to provide restorative justice circles, ways that we can address conflict when it arises, and continue to have an ongoing conversation that is trauma informed, because the reality is we're dealing with a population that, because of the nature of their experiences, because of the reality that they're always in a state of trying to protect themselves, or always in a state of being offended. I don't want to say like having to be on the defense, but feeling attacked, and I think that just keeping that in mind with the population that we serve, being careful, being patient, meeting them where they're at, and providing all of the resources so that they can make informed decisions is really, really important.
Yeah, just one last aside on that. I think the stories that you're both saying, and just knowing a little bit about your organizations, I think there's an implicit piece here that this needs to happen in community. So radical safety has to happen with each other. And so that feeling that you have to protect yourself all by yourself and be brave all by yourself, that part is very alienating, especially when you look out there and people don't look like you. And for us, in the context of public speaking, the public speaking dominant model is still loud, confident. A lot of the models out there are based on politics or battlefields even. And so there's definitely a male dominant norm that's not really pointed out. It's just that's how people are supposed to speak, as opposed to being quieter or have one-on-one conversations and other forms of expression.
And also piggybacking on what you said, AnnMarie and Sloan, I think what came up for me was the idea of vulnerability. Yeah. And when we're forced to be vulnerable versus we walk into our vulnerability, and especially when those spaces are brave, and then we can understand vulnerability as not a space we need to be threatened by all the time, like it become a space that we can explore. And I think for especially women, and girls and gender expansive youth, we find this space where we can't be vulnerable, right? Because it's like that can be too high of a risk, just the way we walk in the world, and the way people see us in the world. So when we have somewhere where vulnerability can be just there, and you can kind of be in your vulnerability, be held in your vulnerability, be supported in that space, I think it just builds an opportunity, or it creates an opportunity of healing, an opportunity of access that we don't just naturally want to go to or be in.
Yeah, I think that is also an equity issue when some people are able to be vulnerable and others, that's not an option for them. They always have to have their armor on.
This leads us beautifully into the last question of So what does it all look and feel like? Like implement it and which not? How do you know it's working?
You want us to all write dissertations on that?
I'm like, okay, so my first response to the question when I heard it was like, it looks like youth that keep coming back, you know? It looks like young people that want to be a part of what you're doing. It looks like excitement. It looks like tough conversations that people are willing to forgive, you know? I think that making sure that the youth are willing to show up where they are and like feel comfortable being vulnerable, as we mentioned before, like that vulnerability piece, creating connection, without the respectability politics, without the making them feel like they have to show up in any particular kind of way. Like they can just be themselves and be accepted, without having to fit into any kind of additional boxes. And reciprocity and mutual exchange, like making both parties or all parties feel like they are benefiting from the experience so that no one feels exploited, no one feels taken advantage of, like it's sustainable.
For me, all of that, my goodness. And then I was thinking in a very just nutshell, it looks like love that's felt and seen. I grew up with a mother that I could see that she loved me, but I think at a young age, I had to kind of like articulate that in brain space where I needed it in my heart space. So I think I want the love to be seen and felt. And like Sloan said, they're coming back, you know, so they're coming. I want to make sure they're coming back because they can feel it as well, not because they're trying to, oh, this is the right thing to do. So having those connected spaces.
I love this question about feeling. I think that's really what the indicator should be all about. And so for us, you know, I always look for laughter. I also look for intensity. And sometimes it goes back and forth in an entire session. I think that's very exciting. I also think too, like for some students, they get used to always being in the same pattern all the time, and everyone like expects them to be a certain way. So I think radical safety also looks like a lot of surprises, and people being surprised by each other. And then one reflection, so as a high school student, I was a little awkward. I was, you know, okay, but I loved debate because it was okay to be a little nerdy. And you know, I felt like I found my people. And we hear that at the practice space, people saying that they feel like they found their people. And I also heard early on in, I think, our first year, a young person came up to me and said, "No, AnnMarie, you're kind of awkward. You're a little weird." And like, I, you know, professionally speaking, try not to be awkward and weird. And so like, it always has a negative connotation, but around youth, I kind of a little different. And, you know, is that a good thing? And yes, awkwardness is awesome. Awkwardness is a great thing. We should all be a little awkward and a little weird. And so I think feeling okay to be awkward, weird, whatever other things you bring to the table, to laugh freely, however you laugh, and be surprised by one another, and have those moments not just be fixed moments, but part of the culture and the community.
So we have about 4 minutes left, and all of your comments really reminded me. I'm slowly reading Bell Hooks' book, All About Love, because it's a lot to digest. It's a small book, but it's a lot to digest. And it just really makes me think of the definition of love that she kind of rolls with in the book, which is as the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's spiritual growth. And I really, and that's your heart space and that's your brain space, right? That kind of mind, body, soul. And I love this conversation around that people essentially feel they can be 100% authentically them. And I love that it's them coming back to the space and engaging more and more and more in the space, which means trust has been established, which means those difficult conversations can happen and you can forgive through the conflict that may arise, and you can move through that and past that, because you can show up. One of the things I'm also thinking of listening to all of you is radical safety means I have permission to take up space. I can be big. All my energy can take up this space, and it won't be judged. It won't be challenged. It won't be. I can just be. And so that's kind of my summary of your comments. But do any of you in these last 2 minutes or so have any final words you want to share with our audience members?
I think that if there's anything I can share is kind of thinking of self a little bit in this work that we're doing right now, because it's hard, and we have to take care of ourselves and make sure that we create our own space so we can hold that space for the youth we're working with. And I think maybe AnnMarie and Sloan feel the same way. I'm like, wow, this conversation is too short. We need to talk more, you know. But I just appreciate, again, everyone for being here and, you know, centering yourself as well, because you deserve to be centered and taken care of so you can be in a space to do the work that's needed out there with our youth.
I think also, so I think with all of this work, we need, I mean, I'm biased because our name is the practice space, but we need more spaces to practice. And practice doesn't just happen. It's facilitation and guidance is really important, and mentorship. And it doesn't just have to come from adults, it can come from youth. But I often end up in spaces where people care very deeply about youth voice, but the structures aren't there for it to happen. And then youth get very uncomfortable with all of that freedom because there's so much judgment in the world. And they come with a lot of experiences where they've been in free spaces that have been very harmful to them. And so I think having that care and that guidance and that explicit facilitation of space and teaching youth to do that is really important so that people can practice together.
I'd love to end with just saying that I really prioritize and value youth advocacy, youth perspective, youth voice. And I want to offer, and it's not to say that folks that are already in this room and contributing and dedicated to this conversation don't carry this value, but just uplifting that young people are people, you know, they're human beings, and that, you know, every day we wake up the oldest that we have ever been, with all of the experiences that we will ever know, and even encountering them and engaging with them, they have all of the wisdom that they are going to need in the moment that they are, and we should trust them with that. So I really, really just am here for that. So yes.
Shay, can I just add really quick as well? For those of you working with youth, keep in mind that you have someone who's kind of a little stuck in time too. I'm keeping that in mind when I'm working with my middle school students. And I mean stuck in time because the last time they were in a group with kids, with energy, etc., it's been almost 2 years. So my 6th graders are technically 4th graders when I think of school. So I'm thinking of how they're showing up at school. My 7th graders are 5th graders. My 8th graders are 6th graders. So we're moving through, kind of like AnnMarie says, the space without judgment, because they're making some of the mistakes. I'm like, wow, that's very elementary, and I'll keep it to myself. But I'm seeing that they're adjusting to what it's like to now be in this new space where they've been called to come to school.
That is powerful. And with the interest of keeping time, I thank you all for joining us today and being a part of our conversation. And I hope you gained a lot of insights out of this. I did. I took notes, and so I plan to contact all 3 of you because you guys are gifts and treasures to us. And so I really, really, really deeply appreciate you, Nefertari. Did I say, I see, I did it, right? And then AnnMarie and Dr. Williams, I really appreciate you all taking time out of your day to be a part of this panel and share your insights and expertise with us, and mostly sharing that love and nurturing with us. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Nefertari, I think I was reading your name backwards. I apologize.
No, y'all are fine.
Yeah.
It's me. It's all me.
The main thing is so I tell my babies all the time, because sometimes the spellings, I say, correct me, because this is yours, and I don't want to chop it up, make it mine, or abbreviate it. I'm gonna make my mouth move the way it needs to move. I want to do what I need to do.
That is so considerate, and I appreciate it. Coming up, it was like enough people have butchered it that I just want to be Cher. I just want to be Beyonce. So
bet.
So Sloan, but anybody that can pronounce it is welcome to.
Yes.
Thank you. All right, bye everyone. Take care.
Everyone, see you guys
Bye.
back in the main stage. Bye.
Bye.